will you be candid with an old friend and tell me what you did and what you didn't do here in the White House?
I did not ever get involved with political decisions.
Ever?
Ever.
Based on that 1989 interview with the late Mike Wallace, it would be easy to see former First Lady Nancy Reagan as her husband's biggest booster, but not a lot more. But it turns out Mrs. Reagan was a lot more. Here's Lesley Stahl of 60 Minutes.
For most of the 1980s, Nancy Reagan was the glamorous First Lady, known for her adoring gaze upon the president, for which she was often criticized. But Washington Post columnist Karen Tumulty says there was a lot of depth and heft to this woman in her new book, The Triumph of Nancy Reagan, published by Simon & Schuster, a Viacom CBS company.
She was an incredibly complicated person, and her demons were such that she brought a lot of her troubles on herself.
The troubles she brought on herself had to do with her image. I remember when she was First Lady, there was a recession, and he was cutting social programs, and she decides she's going to redecorate the White House. She's going to buy very expensive china for the White House. It was as if she had no antenna.
One of the great mysteries about Nancy Reagan is that a woman who was so attuned to her husband's public image could be so clueless about her own.
For instance, she wore expensive designer clothes, but it came out that many of them were freebies.
Basically, there were two stereotypes of her, that she was sort of a vapid socialite, or that she was the scheming power behind the throne.
Oh, I certainly hope I'm one of the powers in his life. He's one of the powers in my life.
Whenever we needed to get something done, we would make sure we went to her because we knew she had the most significant influence on President Reagan.
Jim Baker was the White House chief of staff in the first term of the Reagan administration. She wanted her image to be the little woman smiling, gazing up adoringly, and kind of hid the depth that she had.
That's correct. She did not want to be seen to be the power behind the throne, but she was an extraordinarily influential person behind the throne.
Doing everything we can.
Doing everything we can.
One of the ways she used her influence was to try to get the president to tone down some of his rhetoric.
She hated the phrase evil empire that he used to describe the Soviet Union. And she and he would quarrel about it in front of other people. She just thought it was a terrible mistake to be framing it that way.
She lost that fight, but was more successful when it came to the AIDS epidemic. After the death of actor Rock Hudson, she persuaded the president, after 6 years of silence, to make his first big public speech before the AIDS Research Foundation, chaired by Elizabeth Taylor. But she worried that the regular White House speechwriters were too ideological.
She's afraid if the White House writes the speech, it's going to come off as too harsh, that a lot of people in the Reagan administration didn't really see AIDS as a health crisis. They saw it as a moral crisis. So she goes
a gay crisis.
She goes out and recruits the speechwriter who will write the speech.
We mustn't allow those with the AIDS virus to suffer discrimination.
Do you still maintain you didn't make a mistake, Mr. President?
Ronald Reagan's most unpopular stretch was during the Iran-Contra affair, when it was revealed that, contrary to his public statements, the administration was selling arms to Iran in exchange for American hostages held in Lebanon. Realizing that damage control was needed, Nancy Reagan leaned on the president once again.
She really, in ways that people didn't recognize at the time, put together the rescue effort. She persuades her husband that he is going to have to admit to the country and admit to himself that he has traded arms for hostages.
And she's the one who pushes that. Wow.
She does, to the point of sneaking people up into the residence to help her make her case.
A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not.
Nancy Reagan blamed Iran-Contra on the man who replaced Jim Baker as chief of staff, Don Regan.
She begins this campaign to get rid of him, and her husband refuses to fire the guy. Finally, she starts calling Reagan, and he will pick up the phone to hear the First Lady's voice at the other end of the line say, "Oh, Dawn, are you still here?" Right?
My antenna always go up when I feel that somebody is trying to end run Ronnie and has their own agenda. And that's when I step in.
It came to a head when Reagan made a fateful mistake. He slammed the phone down on the First Lady.
Word gets out. Now, rather than Nancy Reagan just telling her husband this herself, she leaks it to the news media.
A source very close to Mrs. Reagan told me today that Mrs. Reagan purposely leaked the story that she's no longer talking to Donald Reagan to try to force Donald Reagan out of the White House.
The Reagans are sitting there watching television one night in the executive residence, and Reagan hears this report that the chief of staff has slammed down the receiver on his wife.
Someone asked me one time, they said, "What do you think about that?" I said, "Are you kidding? That's a hanging offense."
And it was. Reagan was gone. To me, that episode shows that she, by that point, was playing with the big boys.
She's very shrewd. If she can't move her husband one way, she withdraws, she regroups, and comes at him from a different direction.
Ronald Reagan's crowning achievement was breaking the ice with the evil empire and starting a face-to-face dialogue with the Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev.
She would always say that she never got involved in policy questions.
Please.
Exactly.
Please.
She was relentless, among other things, in pushing her husband to negotiate with the Soviets.
I remember so vividly her saying to him, "Ronnie, you need to sit down with Gorbachev and talk with him." I mean, that's the kind of influence I think she had on him in a number of different instances.
She really envisioned that this would be Ronald Reagan's place in history as a peacemaker and not a warmonger.
Of course, that was near the end of the Reagan administration.
Mr. President!
But early on, Ronald Reagan was shot less than 3 months after his inauguration. What wasn't known at the time was that he came very close to dying. How did things change for her and the White House after he was shot?
She became very, very, not paranoid, but very nervous anytime there was going to be a public event. And it was only after that attempt that she began, I think, to regularly consult her astrologer friend.
And this was kept a great secret within the White House, known only to a few. Michael Deaver would sort of carry out the scheduling decisions that the astrologer demanded.
You quote her explaining why she turned to this astrologer. You say, she said, each person has his own way of coping with trauma.
It was her way of getting through each and every day, knowing that around the next corner, danger, treachery could be waiting for her husband.
Theirs was one of the all-time great, long-lasting love stories. Tumulty writes about how incredibly devoted they were.
People would think that this gaze that she fixed on him, it must have been an act. But this was the way they were with each other publicly and in private.
She gazed at him in private? Really?
They would, they were very affectionate. He would leave notes for her all over the place, passionate letters he would send her.
Wow.
And there's a moment in his diary after he was almost assassinated, and he writes about opening his eyes in the hospital and seeing her face there. And he writes, "I just hope there will never be a day where I open my eyes and do not see that face, because in all the ways that God has blessed me, she is the biggest gift I've gotten."
It was heartbreaking for her. for everyone when he succumbed to Alzheimer's. Nancy Reagan spoke about it with Mike Wallace in 2002.
Lonely?
Yes, it's lonely.
Yeah.
Because really, you know, when you come right down to it, you're in it alone, and there's nothing that anybody can do.
And ultimately, when he is incapacitated by Alzheimer's disease, where he begins this long journey to a place where she cannot follow him, it really does fall on her shoulders to protect the legacy.
If you didn't admire her while she was in the White House, you certainly came to when she took care of him.
It's one of the tragedies. I mean, for the acclaim that finally came her way, she paid the highest price imaginable.